Well, hey everybody, thanks so much for having me. I always love getting together and talking to the people on the ground doing the hard work. As most of you don't know me, so I thought I'd introduce myself briefly. My career started with the Maryland Natural Heritage Program way back in 2001. I moved to North Carolina in 2016, became the mountains ecologist and botanist, and this was really the foundation of my career. Was that on the ground inventory, understanding the flora, doing what we can to conserve the flora. And then in 2021, I became the chief botanist at NatureServe. We'll talk about NatureServe a little bit today, but that's where I got to work with people like Tara and the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, all those programs across the country to figure out what plants needed our attention. And then in 2025, after finishing my PhD with Alan Weekly at UNC Chapel Hill, I became the CEO at the Center for Plant Conservation. And I love this job, but I'd still rather be butt deep in the swamp in the field way back like I was here in 2002. That's where my passion and love lies. But doing conservation at this level is also extremely rewarding. But I just want to make a pitch that it really happens on the ground. Conservation happens on the ground, and we need to remember that with all of our conservation decisions. So I'm going to start out high level today and just talk about how ancient our flora is, because oftentimes we forget. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but when we talk about why we're conserving rare plants, many times it's a personal question. But I'd like to point out that the average plant species, according to Comey and Orr in this amazing book called Speciation, they talk about how the average plant species is over 2 million years old in evolutionary age. Humans only evolved as a species about 300,000 years ago. So I'll point out here in my kind of introductory slides that our flora is ancient and it's at risk because of what humanity is doing to the world. And we know it's ancient. We can look at some distribution patterns across the globe. You'll see the eastern United States here is that blue one, and the East Asia in blue one. And that's from this wonderful paper I've cited below it. But that divergence happened 30 to 50 million years ago. If you go outside, you see the magnolias, the liriodendrons, the stewartes, the liquid ambars, the nissas. They all have analogs in Asia, back from when the continents were in different positions. So we just have this ancient flora all around us. So don't be confused that just because a plant is at risk of extinction, it doesn't mean that it's just rare. It's the threats and the trends to those plants, and we are the reasons for that. We also can see this with rare species and looking at strange distribution patterns. This is the eastern turkey beard and the western turkey beard. The western turkey beard's here, eastern's over here. And I like this plant because first, it's very rare in Kentucky. I think it's extirpated now, but was widely disjunct. It's in coastal plains of New Jersey, gone now in Delaware, and then it jumps to the mountains. And how would this ever happen? Because the continents were in different places 20 to 30 million years ago when this plant evolved. It diverged. We have a western species and an eastern species. So these plants are time travelers of a long distant past, and they survived for millions of years until something's changed, and that's us. And another one of my favorites from Kentucky is the American chaff seed, Schwalbia americana. This was recently rediscovered in Massachusetts, but is a coastal plain species, largely longleaf, but not all longleaf, but heavily in love with fire. It evolved 15 to 25 million years ago, and it persisted on our landscape until relatively recently, where we've seen a decline of this plant across the eastern United States. So what's happened? It's us. And it's not just plants, but it's also the animals. You have to remember the passenger pigeon was a keystone species, probably the most common bird in the world, shot to extinction with unknown impacts across our habitats, including probably one of the reasons the cane brakes exist. No living human has ever seen anything like this picture, which originates from 1905, 1906, which shows canes higher than probably 20 or 30 feet in height. It's hypothesized that the passenger pigeon might have been in part of this habitat by landing in giant numbers, breaking limbs, defecating in streams, but we don't know. But it's not just the passenger pigeon, of course, it's other major keystone species. The animals dictated the vegetation. The bison and elk reached eastern North America, and they were first described as eastern subspecies, but they are gone from the eastern United States, and they've been gone for so long we don't know if they were distinct taxa, but their impacts on the landscape have also been forgotten. Where bison exists, trees usually do not. So grasslands extended far to the east, not just in the southeastern United States, but across the eastern United States. And so did many of the rare plants that supported those habitats. Apex predators are gone from the eastern United States, except for Florida and Michigan, where they're still encountered with rarity in Michigan and some frequency in southern Florida. So our apex plants and animals are gone, and even our most common tree, the American chestnut, which was probably the most common tree in the eastern United States, is functionally extinct. And of course, fire, completely missing from its pre-settlement condition across eastern North America and stretching now into western North America, had massive impacts to our flora. And then we have other major factors like these threats of invasive species. Brome grass, cheatgrass occupies over 100 million acres in our country now. Kogan grass, 1.25 million acres. And where you are, we have other so serious invasives like Lonicera. We also have threats like climate change and sea level rise. So I like to bring all those points in before I talk about rare plants, because that is why 45% of our plants globally are at risk of extinction. In the United States, 34% of our plants are imperiled with extinction. That's one in five. That's a tremendous amount. The paper in the bottom right is an excerpt from Nature Serve. When I was there, we did the State of U.S. Biodiversity Report, which showed that 34% of our plants are at risk of extinction. And it's not just because there's few of them. It's because of the rarity, threats, and trends against them are serious. And that brings us to the topic at hand, is how CPC slows the pace of the sixth mass extinction. And if you're not familiar with this, this graph here is from the IPBES report, which is a intergovernmental science policy platform report that's published every so often. And in this graph here, that in the paper, they had this graph that showed raising extinction rates for vertebrates. And I'll point out first that there is a background rate. Extinction is a natural process, which is shown at the bottom of the graph, but we are, exceeding this 100 to 1,000 times the background rate because of the threats and changes I've mentioned to our landscape. Now, these are just vertebrate animals because in 2019, when this graph was published, we did not yet have data on extinct plants. But subsequent to this, a few things have come out, and the one I'll mention here for time is a paper I helped lead on the extinct plants of the continental United States and Canada. And the citations there at the bottom, this is in conservation biology. This is freely available to us all. So first, looking at the map on the right, each red dot is the point of a now extinct plant. The two regions that have this blue hash mark, the area in the eastern United States, was for one of our two wide-ranging species, not all is micranthemum, and the one in the central United States is for Crataegus fecunda, the St. Clair's hawthorn. Most other plants are known from explicit, tight, narrow geographic distributions, which is why they're depicted by a point. We documented 51 species and 65 total extinct plants, or plants that were presumed to be extinct. One of the surprises is that 64% of all those extinct plants were known from just one location or single site endemics. We'll talk about that later on. That gives us an extinction rate for comparative purposes looking towards the future of 0.4% of the flora and an extinction rate of about 3 plants per decade. We documented 7 plants that were extinct in the wild, which we won't really talk about today, and 4 dark extinctions. And those are plants that went extinct and are only known from herbarium specimens. So they went extinct before they were described even new to science. But doing this work made me realize that we need a lot more urgency behind what we do and a lot more prioritizations to prevent plant extinction as we look forward. And that's why I'm at the Center for Plant Conservation. I feel like our moment in time will be defined by the species we keep present on this planet or this inflection point called the sixth mass extinction. So what do we do about this? Because there's a lot to consider. Well, putting it simply, we need to prioritize, we need to plan, and we need to act. So what does that look like in practice? First, we are very lucky that we already have a couple systems in place that will help us prioritize. So on the left is the Nature Serve system of conservation status ranks. This is what I worked with my entire career. I still work with it. That's what y'all work with on the ground in Kentucky when you just use these S ranks instead of G ranks or subnational ranks. But there is also this parallel to the global assessment methodology, which is the red list methodology. Though both are global assessments, their languages speak different crowds. But here at the Center for Plant Conservation, we spend most of our time on the G1 and G2 plants. We'll talk about how they nest into the national collection in a few minutes. But I want to point out that this area of red, be it the red list assessment or the nature serve assessment, those are the plants or animals that need our foremost attention now. We already have them prioritized, and this is not bean counting. This is a prioritization based on rarity, threats, and trends. And if we're working outside these groups, I would ask, why? Do we not have something more important, or is it just an opportunity cost? So keep that prioritization, that urgency in mind as you do day-to-day plant conservation actions. So at CPC, I like to introduce the group shortly. We've been around now for 42 years, which is very exciting. And our mission is to safeguard rare plants by advancing science-based conservation practices, connecting and empowering plant conservationists, and inspiring all to protect biodiversity for future generations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here for time purposes, but I will point out that the network partners we have across now touch 3 continents. There's 82 of them that cover 30 states and territories and employ over 300 conservation officers. We need or should find more partners in the Southeast. That's something I'm working on now. We have some funding to help a partner in Alabama. I would love to find a partnering institution in Kentucky. I will point out that one of our partners, the Atlanta Botanical Garden, does the work throughout the Southeast region, and the Missouri Botanical Garden does work into Kentucky. So even if you don't see a dot in the state you are interested in, we may have a partner doing work in that state or region as well. One of the flagship programs we have at CPC is the National Collection. This is based on largely G1 and G2 plants, which are the rarest plants that need our attention. And the intent is to safeguard all of the G1 and G2 plants in the flora. And this is a meta collection, so we have not just one collection, but we try to make backup collections at other facilities, including the National Laboratory for Genetic Resources Preservation in Fort Collins, Colorado. We have web-based profiles for all the plants in the National Collection. And one of the things we try to do, which is kind of novel, is get the National Collection species sponsored. And sponsorships start at $10,000, but those pay out annually to the institutions that hold those National Collection species. And that's so it's an endowed bit of conservation funding that partnering institution will have forever. We just hold the endowment here at CPC. Currently, the National Collection has a target of 4,400 G1 and G2 plants, and we've already secured nearly 2,700 through 14,000 conservation quality collections. That is a tremendous amount of work we've done, so it's a great accomplishment. We have a lot of work to do. We do this work through what we call the best practices, the CPC best practices. But I want to read the title of this because some of you have probably heard about the CPC best practices, but the title is important because it is not just for ex situ conservation. These are the best practices to support species survival in the wild. This is freely available on our website to print and download. Please consider taking a look. It's not just ex situ, like I mentioned, which are the best practices for seed collection or living collections. These are also the best practices about putting these plants back on the landscape, how to do that, how to monitor that, because that is one of the great features of ex situ science I'll talk about is the integration of ex situ with in situ, the on the ground. We have a few regional seed collection initiatives I'd like to mention. There are 3, 2 of which are more mature. We have the California Plant Rescue, the CAPER program, which I won't go into detail today because of time, but that is an effort to secure all of the rarest plants in California. That has been a multi-year project. That is, we've been able to get millions of dollars through state and local funding to do this work. And I hate to say the word complete on a project like this because you're never actually complete. There's always taxonomic updates and new rare species to consider, but we've made an incredible dent in safeguarding the rare plants of California. We've also developed the Florida Plant Rescue, the Flipper program, which has a target of over 400 G1 and G2 plants. We have a lot of work to do on that regard because it's brand new and it's largely philanthropic. So CPC is working hard to raise the money to get and then take that money and put it on the ground through like the Florida Natural Heritage Program and other gardens and institutions we work with in Florida to safeguard those plants. That's from CPC's standpoint, we help with permitting as well to make sure everybody has the correct paperwork because the last thing we want to do is promote bad collection practices. But we also make sure everyone knows what other people are working on. We don't want to go out and collect from the same rare plant in the same year. We coordinate those actions and we try to fund those practices as best we can. We also provide a lot of information online for people. We have the Rare Plant Academy. This is free for everybody. Please go to CPC's website and check this out. I won't spend a ton of time on this today, but I'll just point out that the RPA, the Rare Plant Academy, has a video library with a lot of information available, a community forum, which also includes job postings, and then a full-length course I'll mention called the Applied Plant Conservation course, which is great for students and professionals. The Rare Plant Academy has a huge video library, a lot of conservation videos taken from conferences, some produced videos for our courses, in a total of 13 total conservation conferences. So if you want to find something on a specific topic, you can find here and maybe even find a talk about the plant you're interested in. The applied plant conservation course is the best practices kind of in a living, breathing fashion because we all don't read and comprehend. Some of us are visual learners, but it also has a certificate. So this is again free for everybody. You may want to take a look at this. It's online. It's many hours of material, but it looks great on a resume. But it's really the audience is designed for everybody. So please take a look at the Applied Plant Conservation course if you have time. There are 9 total modules. This has just been finalized and published, over 60 hours of material. I haven't taken the full course myself, but I go back and look at sections that I am not an expert in to help me understand some of our fine ex situ quality science that is happening in the CPC network. And something like this can't be done without a large group of partners. So in the region here, I'll call out the Missouri Botanical Garden and the Atlanta Botanical Garden, who are really wonderful supporters of the Rare Plant Academy and the courses we've developed. So that's kind of what CPC does in a nutshell at a very high level. But I wanted to talk about some future directions of CPC as well, because we have a lot of great things coming down the pipe. I have been the CEO there for since March 31st, so it's been quite a rocket ship, maybe 9 months at this point. And there are a few big initiatives I'd like to push forward. So, first and foremost, because our best practices are science-based, there's always a need to update and maintain those with the new science, the best available science. So CPC is helping fund the updated and maintained best practices. There's a book that anchors our best practices, and this book will be revised by Kay Hankins, Dustin Wolkes, and others here mentioned, including others. It's a book of chaptered scientific material that should be published in 2027, which will then allow us to revise our best practices documents. So a reinvestment in our methodology is always foremost here at CPC. But next up, we have some other high level things I'd like to plug as really being important. One of them is the on the ground restoration initiatives. I don't want to even pretend that safeguarding these rare plants in a freezer or a living collection is the end all be all. It is not. We want those species on the ground, and we want to use the tools of ex situ conservation to augment and help prevent plant extinctions. Where I'm going to talk about some novel prioritizations that we're doing here at CPC. I will not talk about taxonomy today, but one of the big goals I have, and I'm also on the floor of North America board, is this consensus plant checklist of the United States and Canada. We have a great need to maintain taxonomic currency for our flora region, and that includes working with local experts like y'all about what plants occur in Kentucky and have that work its way up the taxonomic chain to the national and international. Right now, there is no standard consensus taxonomy. I can go to one of many databases and find conflicting information, which is all very confusing. And from a conservation standpoint, we have to know what entities exist if we're going to conserve them. And then lastly, new species descriptions. That's something I'll talk about briefly at the end because we are still in the age of discovery and there's a great need to describe our flora. One of the things I want to highlight here at CPC in my tenure is this intersection of ex situ, which is offsite conservation, and the in situ, the on the ground conservation. So ex situ conservation, offsite conservation are those things you might think of: seed banking, cryopreservation, living collection, gene banks. These pictures here on the left are in vitro collections. So some of the rarest plants in the world occurring only in test tubes to stay alive. That work has to be done, as well as the work of in situ or on the ground conservation. That ensures the long-term viability of species. That includes habitat management, invasive species control, and site protections. But these two worlds do overlap, and where they overlap, that is where the magic happens. And that is the future for many of our plants, is this intersection of our two sciences being bridged. With my background in situ conservation, that on the ground conservation, I see this as truly the important phase for North American conservation moving forward. It's how do we deploy these seed bank collections and these living resources on the ground to prevent plant extinctions? Because just because something exists in a seed bank, that's a horrible fate for any species. Or if it's just in a living collection, we want that species on the ground to thrive. And that's something I'm excited to see leadership from with CPC. We are going to be hiring our Director of Science and Conservation. Can't announce who that is yet, but they'll be starting March 2nd. And this intersection between our two science is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I hope CPC can continue to work with partners on the ground to prevent plant extinctions where it matters the most. But another way we're going to help is through novel prioritizations. So I'll talk about the plants of one known occurrence here in just a second. And this was a chapter of my dissertation. As you'll see, this is a large group of co-authors here that helped do this work. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this for time restraints. I'd like to leave a bit of time for questions at the end. But as we mentioned in the extinct plants paper, 64% of all the extinct plants are known from one place. We call them single site endemics. But that may have been a bit of a misnomer just because they were documented from one place doesn't mean they were only known from one place. So this paper has been broadened a little bit to be the plants of one known occurrence, and I'll talk about that briefly. So here on the left, we have a single site endemic. Each blue dot is the on-the-ground location or maybe element occurrence of a rare species. We used a separation distance of 1 kilometer, and in this case, no location on the ground for this rare species is more than 1 kilometer removed. So this plant has only been known from one place, never anywhere else. This would be called a single site endemic because it meets the minimum mapping criteria of 1 kilometer. But we have a suite of other plants that are just as rare, that were more widespread. So on the right, we see that the historic range, we have 3 occurrences. They're all separated by 9 kilometers. That would have been 3 occurrences of this plant. But in this scenario, 2 of them have been lost. So we're down to one remaining occurrence. So this is functionally one occurrence though it's declined to one. It's never been endemic to a single occurrence. These are maybe more rare if you think about the urgency involved with declining plant populations. But either way, extinction can happen in this process, many populations moving to one and then to zero. So both of them should be priority in that they're only known from one occurrence, but separating them two to show that one was more common tells you something much different. And we'll talk about those briefly as we move forward. So looking at the plants of one known occurrence in the United States and Canada, I'm probably going to be submitting this next Friday. We're just waiting for some governmental forms to be signed by one of my co-authors. But we're hoping this is an actionable published publication that will move us as a scientific community to prevent plant extinctions. So we've identified 215 plants of one known occurrence in the United States and Canada. There are 85 of one remaining occurrence and 130 single site endemics. I'll also point out that even data on this group of plants, extremely rare group of plants, needs more data. We have 63 that might be plants of one known occurrence, but we don't have enough survey information on plants and their occurrences that they could be known from 2 or 3 populations. We haven't included them in these results. This is an area of priority on the ground survey needs. There are 44 one remaining occurrence in the continental United States, 106 single site endemics compared to 2 in Canada. I think that's worth breaking out. But the state level data is really interesting to see. We have California leading the way with 80 plants of one known occurrence, Hawaii with 60, and then a smattering of states with 7, all with 5 single site endemics and 2 plants of one remaining occurrence. But this project highlights a few things, but it's largely the tale of 2 states. And I'll talk about those states briefly because they tell us 2 very different things. So California, with 80 plants of one known occurrence, California has the largest flora in the United States of over 6,600 native plants. They have 19 extinct plants, and it's also the third largest geographic state. So you would expect a giant state with a huge flora to have many plants of one known occurrence. And you'll see that a lot of them are single site endemics because they have areas of high endemism like serpentine barrens and other narrow restricted habitats. Hawaii, though, is the flip side of this coin. Hawaii has 60 plants of one known occurrence, the predominance of which are plants of one remaining occurrence. So they have declined to one place. In juxtaposition, the native flora of Hawaii is only 1,300 plants. 10% of their flora in Hawaii is already extinct. It is the global leader of extinct plants with 130. It's the fourth smallest state, and it might be the smallest flora in North America. It's either them, Hawaii, or Rhode Island, or North Dakota. The issue at hand here is that the Hawaiian flora is narrowly endemic, and that 90% of their plants are endemic to Hawaii. I will also mention that 10 plants, 10 taxa, 70% of the plants of one known occurrence are known from only one individual in the wild. 32 taxa, or 50% of their plants of one remaining occurrence, have fewer than 10 individuals in the wild. I recently returned from Hawaii, and that trip shook me. we are seeing on the Hawaiian Islands a complete ecosystem collapse. And I worry that that is the future of our flora here in North America, that we need to prioritize and think a little differently. We also did an analysis of where these plants of one known occurrence co-occur. So using the same 1 kilometer, where do we get multiple single site endemics? We circled them in yellow, so there's many in California, one in Utah, one in Colorado. But we also have one here in the eastern United States, which is the Buck Creek Serpentine Barrens. And I wanted to talk about this really briefly because it shows an interesting story. So the Buck Creek Serpentine Barrens were discovered by legendary botanist Bob Godfrey in 1960. This is a really very distinct area of serpentine grasslands, which are very rare in the eastern United States. And it wasn't until 2004 that the first single site endemic, Symphyiotricum rhiannon, was described by Alan Weekly, endemic only to this site in the world. But then in 2014, Buford, Cartez, and others described this Pachyra serpenticola, as the second single site endemic to the Buck Creek Serpentine Barrens. And this Pachyra is abundant at the site. And there is this Acerum or Hexastylus found at the site that is undoubtedly new to science that we're working on describing right now. Brandon Sin, Derek Poindexter, Aaron Flood, and others, and myself working on this now. So this will be the third single site endemic to the site. But when I went out this day to collect the type series of this plant, I noticed this thalicterum, which is related to Macrophyllum macrostylum, but it is not. It is a very distinct species. We're working on describing that now, so that'll be the fourth. And then there's this Cicericium that's also abundant at the site, which may be the fifth single site endemic. So I bring this up because where we have rare plants, we often have other rare plants, and centers of endemism like this should be closely investigated because we are still in the age of discovery, and that impacts conservation. So the new species near and dear to Kentucky is this Thaspium. Alan Weekly already has this in his keys. We know this is distinct. This is probably a G1 or a G2 plant, but given it doesn't have a name, we can't accurately conserve it the way it needs. So Tara, Aaron, and I are working on this now, trying to find some funding to wrap this up. But I'll just drive home the point a little bit by looking at the age of description of our southeastern plants. So this is another one of my dissertation chapters. I won't go into all the details, but if you strip out all the name changes and the nomenclatural changes, and just look at the born on date for when all the plants that are currently recognized in the Southeast by Alan Weekly, when they were described new to science, you can see this kind of graph. And it's really interesting to see how this shakes out. So Linnaeus described over 700 plants new to the flora because he invented the system, right? That makes a lot of sense. You can see his impact in the flora. And then after that, we have Andre Michaud in the 1840s and 50s, described a huge amount of our flora. And then we have this three-headed monster of Gray, Engelmann, and Torrey, which described a ton of plants in the southeastern United States between 1880s and 1900, I think. But then this is the real guy here, J.K. Small. We all know him. He singularly helped describe a lot of our rarest plants in the southeast. But we have this kind of flattening of the curve between 150 every decade. We are still describing new plants in the southeastern United States. We have a lot of work to do, and this is something I want to help with at CPC because most of these plants are either at risk of extinction. So these are the G1 through G3 plants as they're being described. You see our upward trend. And these are our G1 plants, the rarest of our plants, still a great upward tick. And that's also shown graphically. I'm not going to ask you to really digest what this says, but I want to point out that between 1753 and 1786, only one G1 plant was described new to science. It takes a long time to understand your flora and describe and encounter the rarest plants. And you'll see the number of G1s, the number of at-risk plants is only going up as we understand and discover our flora. And those plants are the ones that need our attention more than any others because they're still newly described and we don't understand their function in the ecosystem and we may not know where they are. So I'll just say in summary, we have so much to do that includes describe and protect the flora, but we have a path here at CPC. We do have some new challenges with the limited federal funding we're seeing, and an unfortunate reality is that species will go extinct just because we don't have the funding to do the work. That doesn't mean we won't be successful in some ways. Many plants will survive only because of the work we're doing today. We will probably lose some. So I'll just point out a few ways to engage. Please consider joining the Rare Plant Academy, enroll in our Applied Plant Conservation course, sign up for our newsletter. We send out lots of good news that can be inspiring. Learn about our membership opportunities to be a partner or networking institution. And we also have the CPC National Meeting, which will be at Lady Bird Johnson in Texas, May 7 through 9. If you're interested in attending, look that up. And lastly, here's my email. We don't have a lot of time. I have a hard out in 2 minutes at 1 o'clock. But email me if you have any questions, and thank you so much for the time today.